Hello, and welcome to our Winter 2025 book review series presented by CNMS Success within the Office of CNMS Advising. We'll be coming to you every week in January with summary plus tips and tricks of a book on productivity or something else that would be able to help you become a better STEM student. So let's get started. Today we're going to be summarizing Smarter, Faster, Better by Charles Duhigg. This book is, like I says here, a great book about how to actually be productive. If you have time, of course, we suggest reading the whole thing. It's amazing. But today we're going to take you some of the key takeaways. So the first one is motivation. One of the things that Charles Duhigg really highlights in this book is that you have the power of choice, and understanding this concept kind of just alone is very helpful for motivating you. So your entire day, actually your entire life, is made up of choices. And the choices you make now are going to create choices you get to make later. So it's really important to make your choices deliberately. We like to encourage students to make choices that reflect their goals or their desired identity. So think about what you want to be when you leave UMBC. What skills do you want to have? What doors do you want to be open for you? Think about what you want your resume to say. What do you want that to look like? So think about what you need to do to get there. And you can stop the video at any point, kind of take notes, write these things down. This might be helpful. The next thing that Charles Duhigg talks about in this book is the power of teams and working on a team. So one of the most powerful study strategies is actually to work with a study group. You might not want to be working with a study group all the time because it's also important to learn to rely on yourself. But the reason that study groups are really beneficial is because you get to learn how other people solve problems. So if you're in a group, one thing that the author of this book, Charles Duhigg, suggests is that people in the group should have equal opportunities to speak and contribute because this makes the team more productive. So this means that if you're in a group where somebody is just giving you all the answers and doing all the work, that's probably not very helpful. It might actually be really helpful for that person who is giving you all the answers because they're teaching other people how to do the problems or solve things or understand a concept, but that person is getting all the benefits in that case because they're doing teaching, which is oftentimes the most productive way to learn something. So when you're on a team or in a study group, it's really important to try and actually solve problems in a collaborative way. Your group is going to succeed because of emotional intelligence, so your ability to listen and work together, not because of how much facts somebody knows. So work with each other to solve problems effectively and don't judge somebody for having a different strategy than you, because whether or not that person solves the problem correctly, working through it, understanding why that's wrong is really important for that person. So when you work in a study group, these are really important things to keep in mind. Now, next, I'm going to talk a little bit about mental models. So, a mental model is when you visualize yourself having the ideal experience. Now, keep in mind that the ideal experience is just in your mind. It will never exist in real life. There will always be things that get in the way. But visualize yourself having the ideal experience. So, you could write it down, you can just think about it. But then think about potential roadblocks. There are tons of things that could come up. So be practical. Don't think of every single possible roadblock that could come up when you're trying to have your ideal experience and meet your goals. But think about the roadblocks that are likely to happen because of things that, you are susceptible to, or, the way that your life is. And then finally, think about how to get around the roadblocks. And this can be on a large scale, like graduating from UMBC, but it could also be on a small scale. So like passing a chemistry exam, doing well on the chemistry exam. Okay. So the ideal experience of the chemistry exam is you getting every problem right. The roadblocks are you not knowing how to do a problem that comes up. Or maybe you get really anxious, or maybe you have a little panic attack. That's something that happens to lots of people. So think about those roadblocks in the context of that chemistry test and think about then how you're going to get around them. So if the problem is you're just really struggling with stoichiometry problems, for instance, to get around that, you could study more stoichiometry problems. You could practice doing more of those problems. If you're having issues with anxiety or, other things, That's something to talk to a mental health professional about. Get ahead of it. Maybe talk to student disability services about taking a test in a different location that's less distracting for you. Maybe you're a student who has some kind of diagnosis that makes you get extra time on tests. So make sure that you're advocating for yourself with student disability services to make sure you get that extra time and you can take that in our testing center and not in the big classroom with hundreds of other people. So all of those types of things are potential roadblocks that you can get around, but you have to think about them in advance. You have to plan for them. So if you think about the ways in which an experience might not go well, again, you can come up with strategies for how to deal with the roadblock in the moment. And you will have practiced this in your head by the time it comes up in real life. So you'll have a model for how to get around it. Or, you'll have worked through it in your head and you'll just be able to kind of breathe and move on or get through the issue, whatever it is. But mental models are fantastic. Now, next is goals. Of course, goals are important. We all know this. You get told this all the time. You've probably been told this since elementary school. But let's talk about what makes a good goal. Okay, first of all, is it attainable? So, not only does your goal have to be humanly possible, mathematically possible sometimes, it has to be appropriate for you. So, sometimes students will have the goal, at the end of the semester, they're not doing well in a class and they'll say, but if I only do this, I can get a B or a C. And when it comes down to like the reality of the goal, if the student hasn't done well in any of the tests going forward, thinking, well, if I get 100 on this, then I can pass the class or get this grade, is maybe not appropriate for that student. So think about that too. And instead of saying, well, if I get 100 on this test and focusing on that, that's not really helpful. Probably a better goal would be to ask for help. Okay, the next thing is timelines. So you can have a huge reach goal, like getting into graduate or professional school, but do you have a timeline with smaller progress check goals? That's important. Getting into medical school is an amazing goal, but there are a lot of different paths to medical school, of course, for instance, but also, you need to do a lot of things to get there. So you can't just say, get into med school. That's really overwhelming. It's probably going to make you feel pretty anxious sometimes. So think about how to break that down into smaller pieces, and then you can kind of check progress along the way. Then it's important to be able to adjust. There will always be things that get in the way. Like I said about the roadblocks, they always happen. The ideal situation is not real. So are you able to adjust your long-term goal to reflect reality? Think about this. Things are going to come up. You might have to retake a class. You might need to start research later than you anticipated because there aren't availability in research labs, things like that. So be able to adjust and start practicing that now. Right. So your identity, this is really important. You're made up of a lot of different identities. So this is a theme throughout this presentation, but think about what you want to achieve by the end of your time at UMBC. Maybe it's get a job at the NIH. Maybe it's get into dental school. Maybe it's become a nurse practitioner. Whatever it is, even if that thing is not your identity now, you need to make choices now that reflect that. So we only start to believe things when we're given proof. So getting certain grades in certain classes can help strengthen your identity as a pre-dental student, for instance, or getting a internship at the NIH could strengthen your identity as a future employee of the NIH, something like that. But think about what you're doing and the decisions you're making now and whether or not those will contribute to the future identity that you want to have. But also, like I said, we believe things when we're given proof. So if you want to be a runner, for instance, all you have to do is run. If you can run a certain number of times in a week or a month or a year, you are a runner. You've proved that to yourself. So that's a simple explanation. So if you want to be a scientist, what does a scientist do? They do science. So maybe that means you need to do more practice problems to succeed in your science classes. Whatever it is, think about the choices you're making so that you can then identify with the group that you want to identify with. So the next thing is that failure is a good thing. It's maybe also helpful to reframe failure as not failure because it's kind of a word that makes us scared. But successful people focus on what went wrong. That is literally part of the scientific method. failure is a huge part of it because you look at the things that went wrong and you think about how to adjust them, and you adjust maybe one variable at a time. So of course, focus on your success so that you can replicate your efforts, as I say here. And, playing to your strengths is important. But if you want to keep improving, you have to look harder at your shortcomings. Where can you improve? Because improving can only come in places where you're already not perfect. So if you're doing really well in certain things, that's amazing. Keep it up. But that's not where you need to be focusing your attention. That's already happening. Think about where you can put that effort to make a bigger difference. We can always do better. So think about how you can do better today. Okay, data is so important. This is how we can make the decisions we need to make about the future. So going into this failure kind of logic here, how can you use data from last semester to create goals and plans for this semester? So try turning your data, especially data from your failures, into a series of questions or choices. So, thinking about where you can study that does not have as many distractions, or when do you work best at biology? When can you learn best in terms of the time of day? And, when in the week, based on when your classes fall, should you be learning new material? Do you work better in a group? Do you not study better with certain friends because they distract you? Think about all those things and turn that data into questions or choices. All right, so now let's talk about some tips. So if you're struggling with motivation, one thing you can do is every time you sit down to study or do homework at the beginning of the day, write down your why. Why is this task important to your values? That might be because you actually do really like chemistry, but you're finding this specific topic difficult. But your why is that you love chemistry. And in order to continue pursuing chemistry, you really have to master stoichiometry or whatever it is. Sometimes, though, the task that you're trying to do is really not important to your immediate values. Maybe you really don't like organic chemistry, but you really want to get into that dental school. And so you need to practice organic chemistry because it's important that you get a good grade in order to fulfill your ultimate goal. So you have to make sure that the overarching reason or value overrides the decision not to study or be productive. So think about that. If you write it down, it makes it a lot easier to just sit down and study. So stretch goals like get into med school, become a pioneering researcher in systems biology are amazing. But like I said earlier, we can't get there without the progress checks. And we really advise you to set the SMART goals. You've probably heard about SMART goals about 1,000,000 times in your life. You're probably kind of sick of it. But by breaking the bigger goal down and visualizing the process and creating these smaller SMART goals, specific, measurable, attainable, all those things, it can really help you kind of feel like you're actually on the path to reaching that bigger goal. And last but not least, productivity does not mean that everything you do is efficient. As the author Charles Duhigg says, quote, sometimes a misstep is the most important footfall along the path to success. So this ties into that failures thing. Don't get down on yourself because you didn't do well last semester or didn't do well in a class or didn't do well on a test or don't understand a certain concept. Sometimes a misstep, not doing well when you wanted to, is kind of important. Like you might actually look at that data, as we just discussed, and think about how you can make changes and come back better. So, having an easy time of it all the time doesn't necessarily make you good at solving problems. Overcoming failure is one of the best things you can do for yourself. So let's go into some more specifics here. What should you be doing every day or week? This is kind of a checklist for how to start a day or the week. Maybe you don't need to do it every day. Think about a goal. What do you want to accomplish by the end of the day or the end of the week or whatever time period you're thinking about? And I would say goal here as one thing because it is important to have obviously multiple goals. You need to keep working for multiple classes at a time. That's important. But it's really nice to have one kind of overarching focus or priority every week. That priority should shift because some weeks you're going to have an exam in chemistry, some weeks you're going to have an exam in math, and some weeks you're going to have a paper due in English. And that's also an important class to pass. So every week you should be thinking about the overarching priority and perhaps thinking about what last week's was and maybe thinking about something different. The next thing you need to do is define success. So figure out how you're going to know when you've accomplished the goal. Sometimes that's really obvious, like English paper is done or got B on chemistry test. But sometimes it's like understand stoichiometry, to bring it back to stoichiometry again. Think about what success means. What does that mean? That's a subjective goal. Not all goals are super obvious. So sometimes you're going to have to define that for yourself. Next thing, first task. What's the most important or least interesting, but also, important task? So start with that. Whether it's today or the whole week or whatever, start with the most important or least interesting task. Get it done. It's going to really motivate you to keep going. And this actually is a really helpful thing to do every single day. We sometimes call it eat the frog in CNMS advising. We say, eat the frog, get it over with. The idea eating the frog is like the grossest thing. Do the worst thing first. Next, think about your likely distractions. What is likely to distract you today or this week? Is it your phone? Is it friends? Is it an upcoming event? Is it your family? Think about what is most likely to distract you. And then figure out a plan for how to handle that distraction. Sometimes it's multiple distractions. Actually, think about this. Like, go through, you don't have to write it down, but that might help. Think about each thing that could distract you and decide on your plan. If your phone is distracting you, maybe that plan for handling it, put it on do not disturb, set a timer for half an hour, put it in your bag. When the timer goes off, you could take a short break and reset, do it again. But put the phone out of sight and put it on do not disturb. And maybe you have distractions on your device that isn't your phone. Okay. Silence those distractions too. Maybe that's telling your friends you really can't have them walking into your room at all hours of the day or night because you're really trying to get ready for this chemistry test and it's important. So tell them. Maybe you need to have a conversation with your family about the ways that working at home is distracting you. Whatever it is, figure out a plan for how to handle the distraction when it arises. Then, the end of the day or the end of the week, think about your goal for next week or tomorrow and get a head start if you can. If you're going to think about this daily, I really suggest that before you finish studying for the day, you create the plan for tomorrow. So you've got your task list because it's a lot easier to wake up and just start knocking out things on the list if the list already exists. It takes a lot more willpower to create the list in the morning and then have to do it. So, yeah, that's it. That's the end of our video, the end of our tips for you on how to work smarter, faster, and better. So we hope you enjoyed this and come back next week for our next installment in our video series where we review books. Bye.